In this week's episode, you'll discover these 3 transformational life and business insights from an inspiring and passionate entrepreneur. Number 1, why you should forget New Year's resolutions and opt for sticky goals instead, and how to achieve them every time. Number 2, why we should set out to live each day with intention and how procrastination keeps us chained to the past. And number 3, why the 5 people you spend the most time with will either propel you towards your dreams or hold you back from ever reaching your full potential. So stay tuned for all of that and so much more on this week's episode of The Truth About Business. I'm Benjamin Brain, and by day I'm a director of a multi-award-winning family-run business. And by night, I interview successful business owners to share their journeys, experiences, and truths to serve as inspiration, motivation, and first-hand education for like-minded entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs to fast-track our own business success. This is the truth about business, told by those who have been there, done that, and have the scars to prove it. From the good times to the bad, the marketing strategies and sales tactics to the productivity hacks and success habits. I'm here to give you the de-sugar-coated version of what it's really like and what really works. If you're thinking of starting a business or are already in business, I created this for you. So let's get started. But before we do, I just want to shout out NCupid, who was kind enough to leave an amazing 5-star review on iTunes recently. The review said, "A fantastic insight into the careers of some of the most inspirational business leaders in the local area. Interviews are very well conducted and structured. I genuinely look forward to the next podcast being released each week." So thank you, NCupid, so much for such an amazing review. It genuinely does make my day. And this episode is definitely going to be another one that was worth the wait. So let's get into it. In today's interview, I talk business with Kul Mahay. After a distinguished 32-year career in the UK police and climbing the ranks to be one of the most senior Asian police officers in the force, Kul left it all behind to start out on his own and pursue what he believed to be his true calling. Fast forward 4 years to today, and Kul is now an international professional speaker and leadership coach working in both private and public sector organisations. He's a mentor, sought-after life coach, a published author, and he also holds a transformational annual event in Derby called Ignite Your Inner Potential, which is set to attract an audience of over 450 people this coming January. So in this jam-packed interview, Kul and I cover a lot of ground, with Kul sharing many amazing and massively impactful strategies and concepts to help you grow your business, live a better life, and access that untapped potential that we all have hidden within us. So to find out more about Kul, his events and the services he provides, you can find him online at www.kulmahay.com, spelled Kulmahay, or you can find him on LinkedIn under the same name. This was another brilliant interview with a truly inspirational entrepreneur that, given the fast approach of 2020, could not have been better time to help you set up for making this next year your best one yet. You know, success leaves footprints. So let's take a walk with the empowering and engaging international leadership and executive coach, Kul Mahay. Right, so Kul, thank you for being on the show with us today. I'm really excited to learn a bit more about your journey and your expertise and your business experience.
It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and to be doing a podcast in my home city is just incredible.
So you're Derby born and bred?
I am indeed. Well, not born and bred, but I've been here since I was 16 years old, and
long
been
time.
here a few years now.
So can you tell us, if you had to really define what your speciality is, what your expertise is, what would you say that is?
Well, I always describe this in like 2 or 3 words, and I'm going to try and condense this as much as possible. But essentially what I do is I specialize in leadership, but particularly in emotional intelligence.
Can you expand a bit more on the emotional intelligence? Like, how do you define that? Because it is a phrase that we hear quite often now.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you've asked that, because you know what? When I was in the police service for all those years, emotional intelligence was a concept that I started hearing about in the mid-1990s. And I've heard so many organizations, so many individuals who say to me, oh, emotional intelligence. Yes, I've got a lot of emotional intelligence. And I find myself thinking, do you really understand what that means? So emotional intelligence is a model, really, that's been going around since the mid-1990s. One of the leading lights on emotional intelligence is a chap called Daniel Goleman, who is amazing. And it is built around 4 key quadrants. So within emotional intelligence, you have the first quadrant, which is around self-awareness. Very often we are doing things in life that we don't enjoy, we don't appreciate, or we're seeing life in a very dark kind of way. But more often than not, that is because we just don't know the actions that we're taking or how we are allowing our emotions to affect our actions. So the second quadrant of emotional intelligence is when you now become aware of how your emotions are affecting your actions or how you're living in this world, how you're showing up in the world, is around self-management. Self-management is about understanding, do you know what? I know I'm doing this. I know I'm responding in this way in many situations. I don't like that, so I'm going to do something about it. It sounds easy in terms of the 4 quadrants, but each one of these can be a lengthy process and it's a deep process. So self-management is a critical part of the whole 4 quadrants. Then we move on to the third quadrant. The third quadrant is really around social awareness. Now, that can be entitled social awareness, community awareness, organizational awareness, but it's an awareness of how the space around you actually operates. Who does what? How do things work around here? So that could be within your church, within your temple, within your organization, within your family circles, within your friendship circles, whichever circles it may be. It's having a deep awareness of how things actually operate and looking beneath the skin to really understand that. And then finally, having got those 3 quadrants, they are all geared up to the final quadrant. And the final quadrant is around building relationships. Particularly relevant, I think, in the modern world. See, we're surrounded now by digital communication. I very often talk to people on the other side of the world through a Zoom call or a WhatsApp call or something like that. But in this world where we can connect so easily to other people, the question is, how good is the quality of the friendships that we build? Now, a few years ago, somebody introduced me to business networking. I've not been in business that long, and I started going to business networks. But I soon got turned off because I realized that the relationships I was building were very shallow relationships. That, for me, was not relationship building, but that's how networking is communicated to us. You ought to go to this business network, that one and the other one, because that's how you're going to build relationships. But if the relationships aren't deep relationships, then what's the worth of that? So for me, I'm naturally an introvert, and I like to build relationships, deep relationships with people on a one-on-one or one on a small group. But I find that the relationships that I build are deep, lasting relationships where everyone benefits from that. So the 4th quadrant is a really, really big quadrant, really important quadrant, and I think it's so applicable and so relevant in today's world.
And so for a business in particular, for a business that gets emotional intelligence right, what are some of the benefits that they should expect to see from that?
Well, this is something that I work on with the corporate sector. I go into so many organizations and I get them to look at the cultures, the existing cultures that we have. And, so many organizations have such a traditional hierarchical leadership structure to their organization. And whatever the people at the various levels of that business are caring individuals, they genuinely are caring individuals, they are stuck to the policies and the practices of the ancient traditions of that organization. And they don't really allow necessarily for emotional intelligence. They are reliant on processes and management and the way things have always been done. Even for the businesses that are forward thinking, they build in processes throughout the entire structure of that organization. So consequently, you end up working in a very stilted kind of way. Does it fit with this policy? Does it fit with this process? Does it fit with that process? Whereas emotional intelligence for me is making it much more simplistic. My emotional intelligence is everybody in the organization should understand each other, to know each other's values, to really, at a very deep level, know their own values and those of the organization and buy into those. So a business that really is serious about emotional intelligence will have a culture where they have a higher likelihood of staff retention. they'll have a higher likelihood of less people going off sick, less people committing disciplinary, poor performance kind of behavior. They will have probably a much more engaged workforce, the type of workforce where if you need to push them that bit further because some urgent issue has arisen, they go to the nth degree rather than to the minimal standard. If you are driving people through some kind of a process, they will probably perform, but perform to the minimum standard. If you get people who are emotionally connected to what we're doing, then they go to the next level, the nth degree, as I call it. And I think that's the difference that most organizations will experience as a result of true emotional intelligence cultures.
Now, you've worked with a lot of different businesses across the world, from the private sector, which we'll get into later, to the public sector. What are some of the things that you see, or where are some of the things that you see businesses going wrong trying to implement emotional intelligence?
I think there's a lot of businesses out there, a lot of organizations that understand that there is a real need to have people-centered cultures. And, emotional intelligence, by the way, gets packaged up in all sorts of names, and some people call it people-centered cultures, but essentially it's about building relationships. So a lot of companies and organizations, public and private sector, try to create this culture within the organization where people feel valued and people feel happy coming to work. So what they'll try to do, because they've read about it in some book, because they've seen it on some video, because they've seen it in a journal, they will create colorful offices. They will maybe have, out of the box kind of thinking. Well, it's not necessarily out of the box anymore because people know about it. So it's not really that level of innovative. They'll have pool tables. They will have sleeping zones. They will have bicycles that you can ride around the office. Now, don't get me wrong. Every single one of these things is a great thing. But if that is what you're doing to create an emotionally intelligent culture, that's not going to work for you. Because for me, that is you learning to run before you can even walk. And the hard work hasn't been done. The real hard work is about creating an engaged culture in the first place, to build the relationships across the organization, to create a level of trust in the organization where people feel valued, and also to where people feel like a leader. Now, what do I mean by that? When we talk about leaders, when we have a concept of what a leader looks like, we will talk about those people who are in charge in the organization. Well, I have a different definition of what a leader is. A leader for me is somebody who influences people or influences outcomes. That is somebody who's demonstrating leadership skills. So you could have an admin assistant who is the admin assistant at the lowest level of the organization, the admin assistant who does nothing but make widgets. That's her job. That is it. That's all she does. So she knows more about those widgets than anybody else in the organization. Who would you go to for advice about widgets? You'd go to this admin assistant. And I say, by my definition, that makes her a leader. So if we now treat her with the respect that we think is due to a leader, how do you think she may feel? Now, very often companies think that one of the other mistakes that they make is they think that by giving people more money, that will make people feel better. So they'll give them bonuses, or they'll just increase their wages. Now, that's nice because, obviously they take home more money, they can do more for their family. But there's so much research out there to show that monetary recompense is a temporary blip. It gives a temporary blip of happiness, but it doesn't stay. It's not sustainable. And sustainable happiness comes from how people feel, not the money that they get. So bonuses are great, but if you're only relying on bonuses and high wages to have a happy workforce, you're going to have a problem on your hands.
Can you share the details of a company that you've perhaps worked with, or one that you look out to in the wider world that you think gets emotional intelligence right, and some of the ways and some of the things they do to make that happen?
I can't think of one company that does everything, but I can think of several companies that I've worked with who are doing various things. That if I had the opportunity, I'd take each one of these fragmented policies, bring them all together and take that into any one company. I might write a book on this because this is an incredibly powerful question which gets me thinking. But I have seen companies who first and foremost wake up. They have a realization at a very deep level that, do you know what? we are far too driven by our policies. We are far too driven by structure, far too driven by some dusty old book that's standing somewhere that says this is how things are done by ISO 9000 or whatever it is. And they're treating these books and these policies as the Bible, if you like. And they understand that it's far deeper than that. That if I really want to change this organization, I have to put my people first. Now, that in itself is a big thing for anyone to understand, to get. Then I've seen companies who have created this environment where it's a fun environment to come to work. You have got bright green carpets, bright yellow walls. You have got sleeping zones. You have got roller skates, and you have got fancy meeting rooms that really make you feel good. But at the end of the day, you're still going to do business in those meeting rooms. So, and the people who are really going to make those meetings successful are the people who come into those meetings. So you really need to look after them. So creating a great environment is a good thing. I've seen those companies who actually are creating 360-degree feedback where people within the organization can really genuinely talk to each other. I've seen companies who have created video messages from the senior team on a regular basis where they are explaining to their staff, these are the challenges that we are facing as leaders in this organization today, or this is what my diary looks like today, because what that does is create a level of transparency. I've seen companies who have phenomenal reward and recognition schemes where the nominations for the best employee of the month don't come from some senior leader or some manager. They actually come from the staff themselves, and they nominate each other. So there's so many things that lots of companies are doing out there. And for me, it would really be, to get it perfect, is to bring all of that into one and give that as a package to any one company.
Yeah, there's a lot of great ideas that you've talked about there. Now, if there was somebody in business now that's listening to the podcast, or somebody that's about to embark on launching their own business, and they wanted to take one step to get closer to having an emotionally intelligent organization, what would you say is the first step for them? What is something that they can take away from listening to this podcast and go and implement to help them build a more emotionally intelligent business with better relationships?
Well, first and foremost, don't forget, when I talked about emotional intelligence and the 4 quadrants, the first one is self-awareness. So like with anything in life, and like I've had to do many, many times over in the past and I still do now to a large extent, is you've got to look inward. You've got to understand who you are. You've got to understand what your level of emotional intelligence is. You've got to know where you come from. You've got to understand how you respond to actions around you and the emotions that show up for you. So are you the kind of person that is easily frustrated by things when things just aren't going right? Or are you a resilient individual? Are you fairly chilled out and laid back and say, you know what? I sort of expected that something was going to go wrong. I wasn't sure it was going to be this, but now it's happened. Let's take a step back and let's look to see how we can resolve it. Are you that kind of an individual? So that's opposite ends of the spectrum. It's really about understanding who you are first and foremost. And then the second part of about that is to, when you've got to that level of depth, and that is also about understanding what your values are, by the way. What is it that makes you tick? What's your moral compass? How do you show up in the world, and why do you show up in the world? What gets you out of bed every single day? Why is it that you would do certain things but feel uncomfortable about doing other things? Really understanding your values and naming your values at that depth. And when you understand all of that, if there's something that you're not happy with that you're doing, then you go on to the second quadrant around self-management. And self-management really is about, how can I become a better person than the person that I was yesterday? What do I need to do today? Or what can I start doing today to make me a better person than the person I was yesterday? What actions can I start taking? What action plan can I start creating? What new regime, new routine can I create for myself? And it's not until you've got yourself centered and emotional intelligence and gone through the whole process yourself, should you really then start creating an emotionally intelligent team or culture or business. Because fundamentally it all comes from us anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we started recording on the podcast, we were talking about your time in the police force, which we'll get into in a few moments' time. But as a senior leader within the police force, one of the things that you made daily time for every day was going out there and just talking to the team and finding out if they were having any personal issues and what their own aspirations were. How important is that sort of thing for leaders to be doing, to be creating an emotionally intelligent organisation?
For me, it was a non-negotiable. I mean, there were very few occasions where my PA would have to put a meeting in to that space that I would ordinarily have blanked out, an hour in the morning, an hour in the afternoon. That for me, I thought, if I cannot, out of 10 hours that I'm at work every single day, if I can't take 2 hours out and go and talk to the staff who are doing the work that I'm asking them to do, if I can't do that, then what kind of a leader am I, truly? Now, it was easy for me to ask that question because that came from my own values. One of my values is around building honest, authentic relationships. So for me, I spent those 2 hours a day, whether I had a department with 300 staff, 400 staff, or 20 staff, I would make time to go and talk to people about human stuff, not about work stuff, but about how life was treating them. What are they doing? Maybe talking to them about their poorly dog, or their grandmother who's just been put into a home, or, how their daughter's just gone to school for the first time. All the stuff that is important stuff that very often we make unimportant because we make work important. And what I found by doing that was whenever some sort of important issue came from right wing for me, blindsided me, if I then asked my member of staff, do you know what, we've just had this dropped on our toes, it means I might have to ask people to work an hour later, they would do that for me. They didn't do it because I ordered them to do it. They did it because they knew it was the right thing to do. And they felt that they and I were on the same journey towards the same common goal. And that's what we call visionary leadership within emotional intelligence. So I try to demonstrate visionary leadership wherever I went in the police service. And I think, I still get people now saying, I remember you as a leader and how you inspired me and how you mentored me and how it impacted on my life. And it's wonderful to hear this kind of stuff. But I wasn't the only one who was that level of inspirational. I did it purposely because I wanted to become a better leader myself. I did it consciously, and I'd been practicing this for 10 years before I got it anywhere near right. And even now I'm constantly growing because I'm still self-aware. I'm still learning about myself every single day.
Now, I think, hopefully I don't speak just for myself here, but for many other business owners as well, in the fact that sometimes we really understand that taking that time to go out there and talk to the team and find out more about them is so important. But as the business owner or a director or an executive in any business, there are 1,000,001 things to do on the to-do list. And as much as you can start off the week with the best of intentions of going out there and meeting the team, you get to Friday afternoon at 5:30 and you think, I've not sat down with anybody. What would you say to people that are in that situation?
I've been in that position, for goodness knows how long. And what I would say to myself, from 15 years ago, I'd say learn your time management much more effectively. Now, what does that mean? Essentially, what that means for me now is understand what's important and understand what's urgent. But everything that is urgent is not necessarily important. It doesn't sit on that higher level of importance. But sometimes when things come along and they seem really urgent, we give them a state of importance. So we end up doing them, but actually to have done them 2 or 3 days later, or maybe not do them at all, it wouldn't have affected us at all. But the real foundation, the real bricks in our wall for any company are the people that do what needs to be done. These, without your resources, without your people, that's when the company would stop.
Yeah, most definitely. So I suppose it's a case of sometimes you have to let the small things go to make the big things happen. And one of those big things is getting out there on the front line with the team and engaging with them.
Yeah, and we could break this down into basic neuro-linguistic programming. And I very often say that, whatever you focus on will continue to grow. So if we have a minor issue this morning, let's assume that you come into work tomorrow and there's a small problem on your desk, but somebody else has seen it from a different perspective and to them it's big. So they're now giving you a message of how big and important this job is. So suddenly it's beginning to grow in your mind. And the more you think about that, it might start off as a tiny, tiny molehill, as an actual problem or an actual challenge. But you've now created this huge mountain inside your head. Now, because you're seeing a mountain inside your head, it becomes unscalable. So you end up doing far more to overcome and circumvent this huge mountain, perceived mountain, than you would do if you saw it as a molehill as it actually is. We are constantly struggling, as busy people in life. We're constantly struggling to maintain this level of discipline and routine in our lives to stay on course, stay on track. But there are so many distractions in this world right now. Everything is so fast moving. Digitized communication makes it even faster. We're living in this what we call a VUCA world. It's volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, and it's ambiguous. The rate of change in the world is not slowing down. If anything, it's increasing. It's getting faster. Change is happening all around us. So it's so easy to get distracted from the stuff that needs to be done, the stuff that would help us to stay on track. And very often it's this distractive noise around us that is going to pull us off track. And sometimes it's the molehills that do that.
Yeah, and you've mentioned a word there which is really resonates with me. It's something that I'm focusing again on a lot on myself, is discipline. And I suppose, like we've talked about with regards to making the time to speak to your team and these other ways of creating an emotionally intelligent organisation, it's having the discipline, not just to implement them, but as we were talking about earlier, to stay consistent with them as well. It's not just a one shot and you're done. If you're going to start it, you have to make sure that it's 100%. Continuous and consistent.
I always use the analogy of the gym. You know, so many people set New Year's resolutions. I hate New Year's resolutions, by the way. I've set thousands in my past life, and now say to people, if ever you can, avoid New Year's resolutions. Set sticky goals instead. Really think through your goals. I'm already sitting down with pen and paper in hand. I'm already restructuring what my business is going to look like in 2020. I'm even looking forward to 2021, and I'm already making some firm goals for next year, because they really, really thought through. And I set 21 goals every single year, and I achieve 21 goals every single year. This year, I've already achieved my 21 goals. In fact, I've achieved more things this year than I intended to, which is just a blessing. But that comes from pure discipline. But let's not assume that discipline means that you have to stick to the big, hard, hairy stuff that's out there. Sometimes discipline can be the most basic of things. So start small. Every single morning, for example, I get up and I make my bed. Every single morning, I'm the person that makes the bed in the house. And I do that because when I was 16 years old as a young police cadet, we used to have bed inspections. Our beds had to be made in a certain way. I was ironing my own clothes, living away from home, ironing my own clothes at the age of 16. I still do the ironing for the family now. I find it very therapeutic now. It's my thinking time as well. So that kind of discipline, it's a small stuff. And, when it comes to consistency, as you're talking about, you go to the gym. Let's assume that your goal is going to be that you want to be bigger, you want to be more muscular. So you go to the gym and you start working out. And you work out really, really well. You have a great workout. You do that for 3 or 4 days on the trot. And then on the 5th day, you're a bit tired. So you give yourself a couple of days off. You go back into it. Another 4 days, really hard at it. You give yourself a couple of days off. And then you get more and more fatigue because your body starts crying out in pain because it's just not used to going to the gym and working out at that level. You pretty soon find that you're going to the gym less and less, and you're giving yourself more and more days off. Now that's not going to get you a buff body necessarily. It's not going to make you any stronger. Or if you go to the gym 1 week, you have a week off, and you go the next week, that's not going to make us stronger. The only way that we're going to get slimmer, stronger, faster is by going consistently to the gym, and maybe not working as hard, but working consistently. I would far rather have somebody working for me who works consistently to a level of quality that I like, than to somebody who works really hard one day and slacks off the next day, works really hard the next. I really don't want somebody that goes up and down. I want consistency. I want somebody who is reliable, who has that level of self-discipline to operate right up to a minimum standard, and hopefully beyond that every single day.
Now, you've mentioned something a few moments ago there with regards to you've set 21 goals yesterday and you've surpassed that. You've checked off every one of those. Now, that's something that I realise, so again, for personally, is something that I've not been as focused on as I should have with regards to short-term goals, be it a quarter, in half a year, a year's time. I've certainly got an idea of where I want to be long-term, but I'm not putting any steps in place to help me progress to that. Funnily enough, I've booked a day out this Thursday to really sit down and think about, right, where do I want to be going within the next 12 months, 2 years, 3 years. So what are some of the strategies and tactics that you use when you're creating the goals to make sure that you actually go out there and make it happen? And what are some of the things that I should be doing on Thursday, and maybe somebody else that needs to have a refresh of what they're doing to make sure that they're achievable, but they're also pushing themselves and taking them to where they want to be in life?
That's a great question. I mean, I'll talk through what I do with myself. So I have an idea of where I sort of want to be in 5 years' time. And it's a very, very loose sort of ballpark area where I want to be with my business in 5 years' time. And, in 5 years' time, I want one of the biggest annual personal development events in the UK. I want to have a team of people that go and serve a number of organizations and help embed people-centered, emotionally intelligent cultures. I want to be training public speakers from around the world, both online and offline. I've just started that business about a year and a half ago. It's going really well, but I want to be training far more than that. I want to create authentic leaders going forward. That's sort of where I want to be in 5 years' time. So how do I get there is the next big question. And what I do with big, audacious, hairy goals is, if I focused on this huge mountain of a goal in front of me and I constantly looked at that every single day, I woke up every single day and had this picture of this huge, incredibly massive goal in front of me, I'd be overwhelmed every single day. And what happens when you get into overwhelm, we have a natural tendency to take on the biological reactions that we have to physical danger. So we get into fear mode. So some of the biological reactions are that you freeze, flight, or fight, right? So we either run away from it, or we go hard at it and get into a fight mode and soon exhaust ourselves, or we just freeze on the spot through sheer overwhelm. So I don't think that's necessarily a healthy way of doing things. So what I do is I will have my big goal. I will then break that down into, let's assume that's in 3 years' time. I will break that down into year 2, year 1. So what does it look, in order for me to get to that in year 3, what does it need to look like at the end of year 2? What does that need to look like at the end of year 1? Suddenly, year 1 seems a bit more achievable. But to make it even more achievable, I then chunk it down into goals, into milestones, into monthly milestones. So I'll do some reverse engineering from, let's assume, the end of year 1. I say, well, if that's where I need to be at the end of year 1, where do I need to be at year 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1? So moving forward, all I now need to really focus on is, what do I need to do this month? And what I need to do this month is not quite as scary as what I need to do by the year, or by year 2, or by year 3. So now it seems much more achievable. And if I wanted to, I could actually chunk that down into weeks. I could actually chunk it down into days, into 30 days. So what actions do I need to take? What non-negotiable actions do I need to take today? And it could just be 2 actions. Now, suddenly, when you're thinking about just taking 2 actions a day to get to your eventual dream of 3 years' time, it seems like it's so doable. So that's how I work, and that's how I do what I do, and it seems to work for me.
Yeah, and again, we mentioned earlier about the discipline to having to do the important things, not the urgent things. I think particularly for me, the reason why I haven't spent the time on this that I should have is because if I have an extra half hour or hour, I'll be working on the podcast, or I'll be working on my work with Hanels. And it's actually realising that taking the time to do this, invest this time and energy into creating goals that are going to take you to your vision is more than worthwhile, and the dividends that you'll get as a result are worth putting the time in for.
Absolutely. But the one thing I will say about goals is that work-life balance for me is so important. I now understand with the wisdom of age that if my personal life isn't in a good place, then my work life is going to suffer anyway. If my work life is not in a good place, then my personal life is going to suffer. So of the 21 goals that I set every single year, I actually sit down with my wife to create those 21 goals. So my wife is, 50% partner in my business, and of course she's my 50% partner in life. So we create those goals together. But the fact that I know that she's signed up to the goals as much as I'm signed up to the goals, that's emotional intelligence. We've built a solid relationship with each other. We share the same values. We understand the same vision. And consistently throughout the year, when I'm working away, and I've got a couple of international contracts that I'm just bidding for at the moment, which will require me to do exactly that. And we hate having time away from each other. But when I am working away, she knows I'm working away because it's part of our already pre-planned and pre-agreed goals.
And they're shared goals as well.
Shared goals.
Do you find yourself holding each other to account with those goals as well?
100%. And the great thing is, because we've created this beautiful sort of energy around us, is that we can have that difficult conversation, but in a very nice kind of way. So it's not so much contentious anymore. It is just what it is. It's a conversation that we need to have around accountability. And just talking about accountability, this is why I get so many leaders coming to me for coaching, because they know that when they make a promise in a coaching session to me, I'm going to hold them to account. I'm going to say, well, you promised yourself that you're going to do this, that, and the other. Why haven't you done it? So that's where a coach is very important. Or somebody who is that level of close to you, that bought into where you're going, to have that accountability partner just makes that journey that bit easier.
Yeah, thank you for that. You've shared some amazing insights, and I'm genuinely, what I was wondering if it was going to be a worthwhile day, having the whole day off to sit down and plan this, I'm now really looking forward to and excited about. So hopefully there's a lot of the listeners that are feeling the same way about actually taking the time to sit down, work out where you want to be in life, and then work out the steps to help you get there.
100%.
And like you say, reverse engineering it, finding out what the end goal is and working backwards is the way to do that.
Yeah, it works for me every single year. It's worked for me ever since I've been doing it, and now I have my clients doing it. I do it with my clients because sometimes clients get into overwhelm. So I'll actually sit down with my clients and I'll go through, they call me the immersion coach. And the reason why they call me that is because when people get coached by me, it's a very, very intense, immersive experience. I don't coach you for an hour and let you go away for 2 weeks. No, I'll coach you for 8 hours, 10 hours straight. And we lock ourselves in a room pretty much like this. We'll have food brought into us and we just carry on working till it's done. And so sometimes I'll just do that in a hotel room with somebody and I'll just work backwards over a 1 year plan for them. And some clients have taken it back down into days. I want 2 actions that I need to do every single day because that will be easy for me. So that's what we do.
Amazing. Right, so we know a lot about your speciality, Kul, and thank you for sharing everything that you've talked about so far. I'd like to find out a little bit more now about your own journey to the launch of the business, particularly with what you do now, because it's a very interesting story that I'm sure that we're all going to also take a lot away from as well. So can you give us a bit of a summary of your own history leading up to the launch of what you do now and where you were and how your career's progressed?
Try and give you a warts and all story about...
That's what we're here for.
Well, I think it's important, isn't it, to keep it raw and keep it real. I mean, I joined the UK police service. I was so passionate from the age of 10 about being a police officer. That's all I dreamt of. I lived in Wolverhampton. I lived in the back streets of a tiny little area of Wolverhampton, which is a bit run down, a bit deprived. But my singular dream was to be a cop. I used to read every single cop pamphlet, every single police program, book, anything I could lay my hands on. Now, I grew up in an era where all Asian parents just wanted you to be a doctor or a dentist, and it's no surprise that my 2 brothers have become doctors and lawyers and my sisters are all nurses, but I did not want to be that. I wanted to be a cop, and I eventually persuaded my dad to agree with me, and he did, and he became my biggest supporter since. But when I got to the age of 15 and a half, and in those days, back in the 80s, we had full-time police cadets. So they were paid police cadets, and every force had these police cadets. So between the ages of 16 and 18, you could join up, and it was a bit like an apprentice scheme, if you like. But you had a uniform, you did all sorts of incredible stuff and got to experience policing. So we've got 43 police forces in England and Wales, and I must have applied to, I think it was 26 police forces I applied to, and 26 times, it was in the days of snail mail, we didn't have email. 26 times I got a letter come through the post, and when I opened up that letter with trepidation and trembling fingers, I saw those first few lines, "We regret to inform you." So by after the 26th, I'd sort of almost given up, and I was already now planning to do A-levels. And one day an advert came on television for Derbyshire Police, and my dad said, "Look, you've passed the national entrance exam, you've got the minimum qualification, just do it." And it was my dad that told me to go for it. And a few weeks later, here I was in Derbyshire, and I've never left since. I've had a wonderful career in the police service. I still think that we've got the best police service in the world, and I think Derbyshire Constabulary is one of the best in the country. I have a lot of respect for my colleagues and the work that they do now. But about 1990, I suffered with tuberculosis. So I don't know where it came from. Half my left lung was eaten away. I spent several weeks in hospital. Now, if you want to have a time where you are forced to sit and think and plan, that is the place. I was just talking to a fellow speaker today who's had a throat operation, and he said, I've had 3 days in hospital and I've done nothing but think, because I can't read, I can't watch a movie, I don't want to focus on it, I just think. He said, I've meditated on my plans for the future, and that's sort of what I did. And it's at that time in your life when you start questioning everything, and I did. I questioned everything. I questioned my life, my thinking, my values, how the world operated, why certain people did certain things, all this kind of stuff. And I realized that mindset was at the bottom of everything. How I felt about myself was down to mindset. How I felt about my relationships was down to my mindset. How I felt about the job was down to mindset. How and why people would commit murders or crime is down to mindset. So I thought to myself, I need to do something about my mindset. And mindset was not a big issue back then. It wasn't so popular as it is now, the whole concept of mindset. So I started researching emotional intelligence. I went on my first personal development course, which is a 3-day course, which blew my mind. I then started reading books, and I've been sort of addicted to it ever since. And 10 years before I left the police service, I realized that whilst I'd been doing an incredible job in the police service, it's an incredible career where you're changing lives, I wasn't changing lives enough. What I was doing was responding to things that was happening, but I couldn't change the way people thought to prevent them from happening in the first place. So I decided that I wanted to create a ripple effect of what I call realistic optimism in the world. I wanted to help people to reshape the way they saw the world. And in order for me to do that, I had to help them change their language inside their heads. So that's when I decided that I wanted to be a speaker. I wanted to be a coach. I wanted to create events. I wanted to create a ripple effect across the UK and then further into the world. And I remember this strapline once came into my head, and it lasted in my head almost every single day. I was hearing this strapline, which sounds really cheesy now, but it said, I wanted to become an internationally renowned inspirational speaker and life coach. And that strapline stayed with me. I don't use that strapline anymore because now I understand it's more than just that, because that was very egocentric. And now I understand it's more about service. So as a consequence of that 10 years before I left the job, and I realized that's what I was going to do. That's when I went on all my coaching qualifications. I've even done hypnotherapy qualifications. I've done so many qualifications, and I continue to do now. I've just passed another qualification for social emotional intelligence. So when I left the police service, it was New Year's Eve 2014 when I actually left. By the 1st of January 2015, I had my first client. So I hit the ground running. And I've been blessed to have had coaching clients from Saudi Arabia, Egypt, India, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, America. So I've dealt with people from around the world. But the one thing I find is that nobody's different. Nobody is different. Everyone has the same issues going on in their mind. It's their internal dialogue. It's a feeling of lack of self-worth, lower self-esteem, or lack of confidence, or their past circumstances are anchoring them to a form of thinking that is preventing them from taking new action to go forward, to break a cycle. So I understand all of that. And of course, leadership became a passion for me as well, because I was a leader within the police service for 20 years. 26 years I was in leadership levels, so the majority of my police life was around that. So I understood all of this, and I thought, this is what I want to do. But the problem was, I'd never done any business. I was in a job that was all about service for 32 years. So when I left the police service, almost blinking in this bright light of the outside world, all I had to go on was passion and energy. So I threw myself out there. I was coaching people from every other country. I was speaking on platforms in this country and other countries, but I had no structure. So I was trying to collaborate with all these people, and I from the police service, I had a lot of discipline. So I always took action, but I found that not everyone is like that, and they weren't taking action. So I sometimes wasted 6 months on working on something only to find the other person hadn't done something. I then launched my annual event called Ignite Your Inner Potential back in January 2017. And that in itself was so successful. We had 70 people in the room. That spurred on to other things. So again, I became more frantic. But then by about June 2017, I realized that I was doing everything wrong. It was not working for me. And I got so frustrated with myself that I actually dissolved my company. And it was my wife that brought me back on track just within days. And she said to me, so you're letting everything go just because of the actions of one or two people around you. That's it. That's the level of passion that you've got, is it? And when she asked me that question, I thought, no, you know I've got a lot of passion. We ended up having a bit of a heated debate. But you know what? Within about 7 or 8 days, I formed a new company. And I continued my work around the public work around my coaching and Ignite Your Inner Potential and my public speaking and my public speaker coaching. I continued with that, but now I had structure. I created a structure around it. I created a funnel around it. I created a plan around it. I knew where I wanted to take it. And the same with my corporate leadership work. You know, I go into organizations now, help them to create emotionally intelligent leaders and cultures. But I had a structure again with it. I aligned with a couple of universities and they've asked me to do some work with T.A.B University around leadership. So now I've got a structure, everything. And the other thing, the key thing for me was before I was all over the place. I was international. I was up and down the UK. I decided that everything I was going to do was going to be in Derby, that people would need to come to me. Unless it's an organisation that I'm travelling out to, everyone needed to come to me. And that was the best decision I could have made because my business has grown so much since. You know, Ignite Your Inner Potential, my annual event itself, went from 70 people in 2017 to 200 people in 2018 to 300 people in 2019. And now we're looking at 450 people in 2020 in January. And we're going to have to look for a new venue for 2021 because we're aiming for 700 people. And the idea is in about 4 years' time, we're going to have 4,000 to 5,000 people coming to an event in Derby, a one-day annual event that they all come to. They don't set New Year's resolutions. They come to this event to have their annual injection of positivity and their annual injection of creating plans that are going to stick. And that's my goal.
Wow, that sounds amazing. So you've talked about a lot there, and there's a few key areas that I'd like to dig down into a little bit more. So with regards to your time in the police force, what level did you work yourself up to, and what were some of your roles and responsibilities whilst you were there?
Well, the highest level I got to was temporary chief superintendent, but I was a gold commander, which is the highest level of operational command for critical incidents, for major incidents, for firearms incidents, for anything that was, that required an evacuation, for example. I was also what we call an SIM, a senior identification manager. So I was one of very few people trained up and down the country as an SIM, and that is the person who is highly specialised and would be in charge of mass fatalities and body recovery, where you've got body fragmentation or mass fatalities. In fact, I was put on 3 days standby to fly to Phuket when we had the tsunami. I went to Nottingham and got all my injections because there was a lot of British people who died in the tsunami in Thailand, and the bodies had fragmented, so they needed to be identified, they needed to be repatriated. Fortunately, I didn't go because I had some personal issues at the time. But I've also been a firearms commander, I've been a public order commander, so I've been in the middle of riots, I've been in charge of public disorder or maintaining public order in the county and elsewhere. I have, I'm trying to think what else. I've done so much.
So a really distinguished career then, in essence.
Yeah, I've been blessed to have had such a vast experience. I've been an SIO, which is, senior investigating officer in charge of serious crime, murders and homicides and things like that. So I've been blessed to have had a very, very wide and varied police career. I've enjoyed every single moment of it. I've seen some harrowing stuff, as you can imagine. I've seen families who've been devastated and torn apart by the actions of one or two other individuals, which then now spurs me on to make sure that we try to help people who could quite easily become these individuals to think in a wholly different way.
Yeah, and you mentioned previously that you'd had this tagline in your head of being an internationally renowned, inspirational coach and speaker, and that had been circling in your mind for 10 years. What had held you back from becoming an entrepreneur and starting your business for yourself before you actually did?
I guess everything that goes on in every single other person's head. I'm not good enough. I'm not ready. I haven't got the qualifications. I don't. Nobody's going to want to listen to me. It's all this internal dialogue, these limiting beliefs, as we call them. And very often when you challenge these limiting beliefs and you ask them, where's the evidence to say I'm not good enough? Where's the evidence to say I don't have enough experience? More often than not, you will find that you're struggling for evidence. So what I'd learned to do was to challenge them, find there's no evidence, then flip them to say the opposite, look for evidence of that, and I will see plenty of evidence of times when I have been good enough, times when I've passed this exam, that exam or the other. So life is really about, for me now, it's always about having one toe or one foot outside of my comfort zone. So every day feels slightly uncomfortable for me. And I would far rather do that in life and in gym than to go at it 100 miles an hour and then suffer as a consequence. That's what I've learned. That's what I've learned in business.
So what we've talked about there, that you had these thoughts in your mind for 10 years and the reason that all the things that held you back was your own limiting self-beliefs, which you realised were not true. You flipped them on your head and used them as a positive rather than a negative. But what was the actual trigger moment when you realised that, right, this is something that I actually actively need to go out there and pursue now? I need to be my own boss and start my own business and fulfil my own real passion and purpose in life.
I guess the moment for me, and it wasn't like a moment in time, it was a moment in an era, if you like, but the moment where I knew 100% that I needed to do what I'm doing right now or do something different was when we had the financial crisis back in 2008. And as a result of that, like the rest of the public sector, we in the police service suffered as well. We had to make massive savings. I remember attending meeting upon meeting upon meeting upon meeting of senior officers, really scratching their heads, thinking, how do we save all these millions and millions of pounds and still deliver a really effective service to our community? We were doing a great job there. We were delivering a really good service to our community. Our confidence and satisfaction figures and feedback was very, very high in Derbyshire. We were proud of what we were doing, and we knew that this would mean going backwards. This would mean that we would not only go backwards, but we would also end up losing massive amounts of our staff, significant percentages of our workforce. Some of these people that we'd known and worked with for 20, 25, 30 years, some of them, but they would have to go because the 80% of our budget is people, and that is what we would need to do. And as a consequence also of the reduced budgets, we would be recruiting less cops, which meant that over time we would have less and less police officers. The numbers would go down, not even stay stagnant, because other people were retiring and we couldn't replace them. Now, every single police force up and down the country, every single hospital, every single school up and down the country, local authority, they were all going through the same thing. And I remember at the time thinking to myself, I was a head of a department at the time, and I was having some sleepless nights thinking, I just have made a decision today to take somebody away and lose their job, essentially, to kick them out of their job. That's the decision. And it was a hard time for me, because I was so people orientated. But I also made the decision that it wouldn't be the HR department that sat down with these people and told them they no longer had a job. It would be me. If I'm the person making that decision, I would be the person that tells them face to face exactly why. And I have to say that those few years were tough years. They were tough years because on the one hand, we had these emotional issues to deal with. And on the other hand, I still had to maintain the level of performance that we were maintaining before, with less people, less resources, less money. And that in itself was a challenge, because we all wanted to make sure our communities got the very best of the service that we were given. So I remember thinking to myself at that time, this is no longer the job that I joined to do. It's no longer the enjoyment. It's no longer being respected or being seen as the job that I've always loved doing. And I knew then I needed to move on.
How did you know there was a market for the service that you were going to be providing?
I knew that there was a market for this service purely and simply because of every organisation was going through, every single, certainly public sector organisation and a lot of private organisations who went to the wall. They were all going to the wall, and I just wondered whether they needed to go to the wall. Could they have done some things differently? Could they have worked with less resources, but those resources could have been much more inspired and do much more? Would that even be possible? So there's that element of it, and that's why I do the organisational work. But on the other side of it, I'd seen so much death and destruction in the police service, and all that death and destruction occurred because one person had a thought to do one thing that led on the path to this. And I just wondered that if I could get people thinking differently, could it be possible for that not to have occurred in the first place? So could that really be preventative? And so I went on a mission to help people change the way they think. And now I say I want to change the world through the transformation of how people think. And that's literally my mission.
And you mentioned that on day one you already had paying clients. How did they come about? How did you go out when you were brand new to this area of expertise and speciality? Where did you find your first clients?
My first clients came to me purely and simply by accident. So the first couple of clients were referred to me by people who knew that I was passionate about what I was doing, and they believed in me, and they referred me on to these people in other countries. And when those people in those other countries got the results that they wanted and they saw that there's a real value in that, they extended out to their networks, and their networks extended to their networks. And before you know it, I was in about 7 or 8 countries, having clients in 7 or 8 countries, which then made me think how small a place the world is. You know, this might have started with just 1 or 2 clients, but it's spread over 7 or 8 countries. It's just incredible. So it's made me realize that we're in a very, very connected world.
Yeah, and that's off to a great start for business to say that you've come from the police force in a very regimented and disciplined routine to then starting out you're on your own, but having that success to begin with, not just nationally but internationally. That's a great start in business. And my next question would have been, how did you market yourself in your earlier days? But based on what you just said, I presume the answer would be that you didn't really have to. It was just through word of mouth.
I really didn't know what marketing was all about. I had no idea how to market myself. There's a part of me that was still saying, still had that police officer mindset where I daren't shout too loudly and let people know too much about me. So there's a lot of conflict in my mind at that time.
So we know you were off to a great start. You were in all these countries with some amazing clients and really making a positive difference to business, which was creating all this great word of mouth. Now, if you could go back to day one, knowing what you know now, and you could do one thing differently, what would it be?
The number one thing I would do differently is to find myself a reputable coach. Somebody who could get all this stuff that's inside my head, put it into some level of clarity, ask the right questions, get me to dig deeper beneath the thoughts that I'd got to the place that the thoughts came from, so I really understand. And then to build some kind of a structure, and from that structure to build an action plan. So I know that I'm moving forward with a sense of purpose and intention rather than just running around wildly with, sort of like a headless chicken, which is essentially what I did for the first couple of years. I was just like a very excited young kid running around in this business world and not really making much of an impact.
And what difference do you think that would have made, having that more structured game plan of where you want to focus your time and efforts?
I know without one shadow of a doubt that had I got a coach to have sat down with me to help me craft and structure a 2-3 year business plan for myself that resulted in milestones and clear actions that I could take, that my business would have flown. There is no doubt about that in my mind. All the things that I'm doing now, I would probably be in this position 2 years ago had I done that.
What's been your proudest or your biggest success so far? Is there the results of a particular client that really stand out, or is it one of your events that has gone far beyond your expectations? If you could pick one out of your career so far post police force, what would it be?
Ben, there are so many, but I would have to say Ignite Your Inner Potential. My annual event, Ignite Your Inner Potential, has just grown. I mean, last year we attracted international attendees for the first time. That was just mind-blowing to think that they would come for one day to come to see me. And to see how it continues to grow, to see how professional it has become, to see the slickness of it all, to hear the feedback. We were in the press not so very long ago about the impact that it's had on people's lives. And there was one lady in particular who's 55 years old who actually went to the media and she talked about her journey, how she didn't believe in herself, how she didn't look after herself. And now, as a consequence of being involved in Ignite Your Inner Potential, and she comes every year, how she's gone to open water swimming, how at the age of 55, she's created a consultancy business, which is already booked in many, many organizations. And that was 4 months ago. And she puts it down to the fact that she got the right mindset coming to Ignite Your Inner Potential. We've had another 60-year-old lady who came to Ignite Your Inner Potential on the first year. She was, I think, 4 or 5 stone overweight. She was suffering with diabetes on 4 tablets and 1 injection a day. She had a phobia of water. She brought with her 30-year-old depressed daughter who had gone through an incredibly awful breakthrough, single mother. And I remember her saying to me at that event, my daughter's not smiled in 3 years, so your job is to make her smile. Well, by the end of it all, one of the things that we do at Ignite Inner Potential, and I'm renowned for it, is Bhangra dancing. So I remember at the end of it, she came up to me, she was shaking me by the shoulders, and she said, look at my daughter, she's on the stage dancing. And that daughter went on a couple of weeks later to walk into a corporate organization, demand a job. She came to me for coaching. She's always wanted to be a teacher, but year on year, this one particular entrance exam that she had to take, she always failed in her maths, and all I did was work on her mindset. That same year, she passed that. She went on to become a teacher. And the 60-year-old, the mother who suffered with diabetes, went down from having this water phobia to swimming 3 times a week, to losing 4 stone, to going down from 4 tablets and 1 injection a day to just 1 tablet a day. She looks amazing now. And now she brings her grandchildren. We had three generations of that family. And, you know, what I'm proud about Ignite Your Inner Potential is that it appeals to everybody. The youngest person that we've had ever is 4 years old. And in the same room, we had an 84-year-old. Last year, we had a 5-year-old, and the oldest person was 76-year-old. So that fills me with pride that we are touching people at every single level, and we are literally transforming lives.
Yeah, and there's another message in there as well, which I suppose is for anybody that's out there that's listening that thinks that they're past it and they're too old in the tooth to change their wages and change their lives. You've mentioned 60-year-olds, 84-year-olds. It's never too late.
100% it's never too late. You know, we had a lady who came last year, and she had a job for, goodness knows, 4 or 5 decades. And she's now in her 70s. She was looking after the aunt of a very wealthy person. But when the aunt died, she was suddenly kicked out of the home that she resided in because the aunt no longer was there and there was no job for her. So she had to leave that home. So she had nowhere to live. She had to find a place to live. She's gone to India, and now she's just launched herself as a foot health specialist. And she's going to do amazing work as a foot health specialist, and people are going to be flocking to it. And she's in the 70s. So age is literally just a number. It really is not a restriction. We make it a restriction. We say we're too young, we're too old. You know, I started this off at the age of 48 and a half years old. And I just seem to be going from strength to strength. You know, I feel very blessed, but I also know that this is not coincidence. This is not happening by coincidence. This is happening as a result of a deep sense of passion and consistent actions that I take on a daily basis. And I put the consistent actions down to my discipline and my absolute clarity on where I want to take this.
And for anybody who is interested in finding more about Kul and the Ignite Your Inner Potential events, all of the notes to the websites and to arrange tickets, etc. When is the next event, Kul?
Well, the next event is Ignite Your Inner Potential on the 11th of January 2020. It's going to be huge. There's going to be 450 people there. We've got some incredible speakers, and all the speakers, by the way, on the stage have been through my own training program. So it's a massive risk for me to put untested speakers on there, but I have so much faith in what I do that I know they'll do me proud.
Yeah, so for more information on Kul's events or his coaching workshops or his speaking workshops or the corporate leadership, all of the notes will be there at benjaminbrain.com/Kul-Mahay, and all of the relevant website links, etc. will be there. So have a look and definitely check those out. And I've seen some of the videos, the snippets of the event online, and it does look like a fun event that is full of energy, and you know, everybody does participate and everybody gets involved. So it's definitely one that I'm going to be checking out myself. So I'm looking forward to that in January, most definitely. So Kul, over the time that you've been in business as Kul Mahay and with the Ignite Your Winning Potential, what would you say has been your biggest challenge in business so far?
The biggest challenge in business for me is understand who you're working with. There is an old saying that if you want to go fast, you go alone. But if you want to go far, you go with other people. And there's a lot of truth to that. So collaboration is so very important, as is cooperation. But if you are going to collaborate and cooperate, understand who you're doing it with. I ended up suffering as a consequence of working with the wrong people. On the outside, we were like-minded. We spoke the same language. We had similar visions and similar outlooks on life. But it's the inner stuff that we need to be aware of. So now I have a new saying that I will connect with like-minded people, but I only ever work with like-valued people, because it's our values that give us a depth of who we are. So if you are, let's assume that you're a coach. If you're a coach, don't just work with any other coach. Only work with a coach who shares your values. If you are into sales and letting of houses and you want to collaborate with another company in another town, don't just work with any company in that environment. They may have similar thinking to you, but look at their values and only work with the same values, because it makes your relationship just that bit easier.
Yeah, that's a great lesson learned as well. So thank you for sharing that with us. You obviously work with many business leaders across a variety of sectors, across a variety of countries and borders. From your time and from your own lessons and experience, what do you think are some of the attributes or beliefs or skill sets that people need to succeed in any sort of business?
A book that I can recommend to everyone, and it's been around for a long, long while, and it still stands strong today, is Stephen Covey's Habits of 7 Highly Effective Leaders. So that is a really, really powerful book, and it stands true today. One of my top books, and I even do some leadership training just based on the 7 Habits of Highly Effective Leaders by Stephen Covey. It is that level of powerful. If there was one thing that I would say is a common denominator in every single successful leader I've ever come across, is the final one from Stephen Covey's book, and that is sharpening the saw. And sharpening the saw means constantly be growing. Always have a growth mindset. Always be looking to move forward. Always be looking to develop new knowledge, new skills. Never be complacent about where you are, who you are in life. Always take one step and keep it outside of the comfort zone. Get comfortable with becoming uncomfortable, because it's not until we have a level of discomfort in our lives can we truly start growing. And, it's the analogy of a 13, 14-year-old boy who's having a growth spurt. He's going to go through some pain. He's going to need lots and lots of sleep. Why? Because his body's going through discomfort. But that discomfort is a good discomfort, because it's going to help him grow. When your baby is crying because it's going through teething pains, those are painful moments for the baby, but they need the teeth in order for them to eat. So just get comfortable with discomfort, always be growing, have a growth mindset, don't stagnate.
What are some of the ways that we can find these activities or exercises or challenges that do make us uncomfortable? Is it something that you have to make a conscious decision? We talked about planning earlier and writing down goals. Are these the things that you are including when you are planning these goals? It's the challenges and the activities.
100%.
Yeah.
The challenges that we plan, the challenges for ourselves have to be new challenges, because if they are things that you're already doing, they're no longer challenges. So, in my book, Smash the Habit, where I talk about how did I manage to give up smoking, drinking, and I was a big drinker, and eating meat, fish and eggs all on the same day, some 14, 15 years ago, literally overnight. 4 years ago, I gave up coffee and tea and fizzy drinks and juices overnight, just like that. 3.5 years ago, I gave up milk overnight, just like that. It's that level of discipline. And I don't want anyone walking away from this thinking, oh my goodness, he must be an incredible human being or have such level of self-control. I haven't. I'm terrible. I still have a very sweet tooth. But, I'm comfortable with my sweet tooth. But I went through this process of self-awareness and I decided that I was not going to drink anymore. I decided I wasn't going to eat meat anymore. I decided I wasn't going to smoke. I decided, etc., etc. So I knew that was going to be uncomfortable for me. So I set that as a plan for myself and I made it uncomfortable for me, but I stuck to it, and consistency pays off. I don't even think about drink now. I don't think about having a cigarette now. I can walk into a restaurant. I don't even think, oh my goodness, I wish I could eat meat again. I don't think about any of these things. I just live the way I live now.
Yeah, and you made some big changes there, but like you say, almost overnight. And I think sometimes we can fall into this trap of looking for a magical tactic or strategy that's going to help us develop these new habits. But sometimes it is, you just have to do it. Like there is no secret to it. You've just got to do it, and that's
very
it.
Very true. One of my tagline is #do-it-now. This is when you come to Ignite Your Potential, you see me shouting it from the stage, and I passionately mean there is no such thing as tomorrow. Tomorrow never comes. So you have to just grab hold of something and you just have to do it. And, when we put things off, when we convince ourselves the timing's not right now, or I've got this coming up, so maybe I don't need to take on an extra challenge. There's another term for all of that behavior, and that's called procrastination. So we can flavor it up and spice it up to call it something else, but in essence, it's procrastination. And procrastination is the one thing that's going to keep us chained up to the past, chained up to the place that we're at now, where we're not happy, where we feel sluggish, where the business isn't growing, where we're not even creating the business, where we're not wearing a smile on our face, where we're not waking up with a bounce in our step every single day. That is all down to this one disease called procrastination.
You've made a big transition from being employed in the private sector, in the public sector, for a good number of years, to being self-employed. During that time of being self-employed as a business owner, what are some of the benefits that you've experienced of being in that position?
I absolutely love being self-employed. I love being self-employed. I'm my own boss. I call my own days. I call my own shots. I have a fantastic work-life balance. Sometimes I can be working late into the evening, as I was yesterday. Yesterday I'd been asked to speak at a fantastic charity gala dinner in Birmingham, and we raised nearly £30,000 there. And I was the compere and host. So that was a late night, but I came back and I still felt good because I knew today I'll have a lie-in. I'll give myself a lie-in. And now I've had 3 or 4 hours of good working. I've got this podcast, and when I get home and, in an hour's time, I'm one of the speakers for an online international summit.
Wow. So really varied day as well.
It's great.
That's your choice to be working at those hours. It's a choice.
I could say no to any one of these things, but I love doing these things. And within all of that, I can still have time with my wife and sit down, and we've got 2 brand new kittens and we love playing with the kittens. So we'll spend time with the kittens and spend time with my wife. After I've had my online summit, I'll come down from my office and we'll spend time together again.
Have you found there to be any downsides that you were perhaps not expecting?
I wouldn't call them so much downsides, but there are lots of challenges that one has to be prepared for. Firstly, business can be a very lonely place. Whereas in the police service, I had lots of people to bounce ideas from, or when I was not having a particularly good day or I had a challenge, I could ring any one of my other superintendent colleagues and share that with them, and they would give me some advice or just be a listening ear. It's hard to do that in business because you are it. The buck stops with you. And so it can be very lonely, but it's as lonely as you want it to be. Because if you create a really valued, a small, and I would say stress, a small but valuable network around you, then you can still do that. You can still pick up the phone and have a valuable conversation with someone in complete confidence, knowing that that person is going to give you absolute quality. And I've done that today. Somebody's rang me today and we've had that conversation. The other thing is, particularly if you've come from a job like me, suddenly jumping into business, be aware of all the things that you have to do as a business. You have to be on top of your figures. You have to have that strategic business plan. You may be hiring staff. You need to be conscious of how that works. You need to be conscious of challenges of creating content if you're into content creating kind of work that I do. I'm working with universities. I'm creating leadership content for them now. those are the challenges. I don't see them as downsides. I just see them as challenges. And the more aware that we are of these challenges, the more sort of strategies we can have in place to overcome them.
Yeah, and you really sound like you've managed to craft a very, well, you've already said you have a great work-life balance. And that's where you're at now. What are some of the sacrifices that you've had to make along the way to get there?
I've had to let a lot of people go out of my life because they weren't serving where I was at right now. It sounds really, really harsh, and I don't mean it to be that level of harsh, but these are the kind of people that were holding me back or didn't believe in me or influenced me to think that I didn't have it, I couldn't do it, it was too big a dream, or merely just scoffed at my ideas, or they didn't correlate with my values. And the more I've dug down into my values, the more I realize that the people around me, I need to make sure are of the highest quality. So, my own mentor, Jim Rohn, the grandfather of personal development, had a quote, and he says, you become the average of the 5 people whose company you keep most. Now, this one quote has served me so well for the last 2 years since I restarted my business. That quote has served me so well and got me out of so many potential struggles because I'm just aligned to the right people now.
And so the lesson for that then for the listeners, does that boil down to, if you are spending time with people who are not helping you to get you where you want to be in life, or on the flip side, they're holding you back, regardless of whether it's a friend, an associate, or even a family member, you need to move away and move on.
Yeah, and what I don't want to encourage people to do is break ties with long-standing friends or family members. But what I've done, the way I've done it, is I've reduced the amount of contact that I have with them, so that they don't become the 5 people whose company I keep most. And that's the key thing for me. So who am I talking to more than anybody else in my life? Those 5 people have to be of the highest quality. And if they're not your family members, then I will reduce the contact. In some cases, I've just severed contact. But in other cases, I've just simply reduced contact.
Yeah, and I suppose I've listened to you. Well, I'm almost all the way through listening through the book Smash the Habits, which you wrote and is also on Audible. But a good analogy there is if you are trying to stop smoking, the worst people to spend your time with is 5 smokers. Absolutely. Because you're going to start smoking, and you can apply that to any area of your business or personal life.
Yeah, and it really is as simple as that. I'm not sure if it's in the Bible that it says it, but there's an old fable that talks about, if you keep the company of thieves, you become a thief. If you keep the company of beggars, you become a beggar. If you keep the company of people who are negative, you're going to become a very negative thinker. This is environment, and the environment is so important. So whether it be your physical environment or the environment in your social circles, that is influencing us on a day-to-day basis.
The interesting thing there is that some of these concepts aren't new. They're not revolutionary. They've been around. You mentioned this one perhaps is in the Bible. They've been around for millennia. It's just that nowadays they get lost.
None of what I've said is new. Absolutely none of it. I haven't invented it. I haven't created it. It has not got my trademark on it or anything like that. Some of this stuff has been around for thousands and thousands of years. And in fact, I love quotes. I love old quotes, old sayings. I love old sayings, like there's no substitute for hard work. I love these kind of sayings because there's so much truth in those. So now whenever I'm trying to explain something to someone, I'll just use an old saying.
Now, you've mentioned earlier one of the books that you'd recommend to the listeners is Stephen Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective Leaders. If you had to write a book on your own business journey in life, what would you call it?
I very often toyed with the idea, and I just keep asking myself, am I at the right place just yet, But I'm doing some really exciting work at the moment, which we haven't talked about, actually, because I haven't mentioned it to you. I've just actually reread the plot of a police drama series that I've been working on with a screenwriter. So he's writing the plot and I shall be the police consultant, but that's going to be about a senior Asian police officer who has stopped drinking and has got all the cultural and organizational challenges and some of the work that's coming along, all these kind of challenges. So it's going to be very, very loosely based on my life. So I've got some exciting work around that. So I could even write a book. I have toyed with the idea of writing a book about my journey within the police service and the transition and all the stuff that we've talked about in this interview, the transition from that to doing exactly what I'm doing now. So I don't know, I would probably call that, I've toyed with ideas like Back to Blue or from cop to leadership. I don't know. I haven't got a title that really...
The concept's there.
Yeah, the concept is definitely... Yeah. We're already working on the concept.
Yeah, no, it sounds amazing. Sounds like you've got some really interesting stuff going on there as well. So.
And we've just had a meeting in one of the main TV channels looking at potentially doing a TV series where we look at iconic crime, but this one is going to be so different because I should be doing this with a guy who was convicted of armed robbery and went to the Old Bailey and got sent to one of the top prisons, and he was a Category A prisoner. He's now reformed, and for the last 10 years he's been doing similar work to what I'm doing. So we've come together. So, we had meetings with a number of TV companies and big TV companies where we're looking at a series where we either discuss crime, just like, on a one-to-one, or we look at crime from a criminal perspective and a police leadership perspective. So a lot of exciting work going on, and I have no titles for any of this kind of stuff.
Okay, well, we'll be definitely watching out for that one, and then I suppose we'll know what the title is when we see it on the screens in a few months or years to come. So, but no, thank you for sharing. It sounds like, say, you've got so much going on. It must be such an exciting time to be involved in so many things and making such a difference as well. What's been the best advice that you've received?
Best advice I ever received was get a plan.
Simple but effective. That's
very,
it.
very simple. And, I was watching an episode of Dragon's Den early on today, and I look for the snippets of advice that they give, and the amount of people they said that to was just incredible. And if you watch things like The Apprentice and,
you would have thought people would have learnt by now. If you're going on Dragon's Den, have a plan.
Absolutely. But there were a few people that, they said, okay, so if we give you £200,000, what are you going to spend it on? And he was like, I have no idea. But no, get a plan, have a plan, at least know which direction you're going to be walking in and why. One of my other favorite books is by my mentor, John C. Maxwell. It's called Intentional Living. And that basically, the concept of that book is you wake up every single morning and you know what you're going to be doing. You do everything that you do throughout the entire day in a very intentional kind of way. And that for me is a really powerful concept, because how much time and energy are we wasting every single day by doing things that don't really matter?
Yeah, and that's just, like you say, such a huge shift in mindset that can have such a... When you look 5, 10, 20 years down the line, you can be in such a different position. And a quote that really resonated with me recently, I can't remember where I was listening to it, but it was something along the lines of, they say that hell is turning up to the pearly gates and meeting the version of you that you could have been, and realising that you were nowhere near achieving your full potential. And heaven is reaching the pearly gates and recognising the person that's looking back at you. And when you do live your life in such an intentional way that you are moving towards that best version of you every day, you have such a better chance of recognising the person that's looking back at you when we all meet our maker at the end of things.
I love that. I love that. I mean, conceptually, it just hits you straight away anyway. But you're right, we all have this incredible potential within us. And 90% of us just write it off straight away. I call it the fourth quadrant thinking. So you have the first quadrant where there is stuff that only you know that the rest of the world doesn't know. Then you have the second quadrant thinking, which is stuff that you know that other people know. Then you have the third quadrant thinking. This is stuff that you don't know about yourself, but other people see in you. But then you have the fourth quadrant thinking. That's what other people don't see and you haven't seen yet.
And that's where the magic happens.
And that's where the magic happens. That's where you dig down deep and you explore it and you just immerse yourself in it and test yourself and just push yourself, and you'll end up doing things that you thought to yourself, was I really capable of doing this? This is incredible. I mean, the stuff that I'm doing now, if you'd have asked me 5 years ago, do you think you'll be doing that? I'd be like, no, I want to, but there's no way. There's no way I will have my own personal development event. There's no way I'll be going into organisations doing that. There'll be no way I'm sitting in the offices of a big TV channel talking about A, B and C with a senior executive producer. There's no way.
It's crazy, the twists and turns that life can take when you make it happen. Like Absolutely. You say, this hasn't been luck, this has been a process.
Yes.
And we've talked about the best advice you've received. We've talked about some of the takeaways that you've really taken on board from books and your own lessons. Now, if you could go back to 21-year-old Kul and you could pass on just one piece of advice that you think would have the biggest impact or make the biggest difference to him back then, what would it be?
I would say to 21-year-old Kul, who at that time would have been a police officer. In fact, he was a young dad. I was a dad very early in life. I would be saying to that individual, don't just think the rest of your life is about the police service. There's a life after the police service. Understand what that might look like and start planning now.
So cool. We've seriously overrun with regards to how much time I planned on spending with you, but I've been fascinated by everything that you've talked about. I've really enjoyed the time that I've spent with you this evening, and thank you for spending so much time with me. But I've just got a couple of questions left before I let you get away and join your international video conference, which sounds like you've got quite an exhausting evening ahead. So my first one would be, if you could summarise everything that we've talked about this evening, and we were sat in front of somebody who's about to embark on their own business venture, and you could give them just 3 pointers to help them succeed as best as possible, what would those 3 pointers be?
They would be, very simply for me, first and foremost, believe that you have everything within you right now to do everything that you dream about every day. The second one would be, have a plan, create a structure, know the direction that you're going in, know the path that you're going to follow. Look at where you want to be in 1 year, 2 years' time, and work backwards from that so you have a daily action list. And the third one would be, watch who you hang around with, and only hang around with people who really resonate with you at a deep value level, because they will be the people that are more likely to stay on the journey with you than to be fickle in and out of your life.
Yeah, I love all 3 of those. Real great insights. So thank you for sharing those. And my final question for you, Kul, we've mentioned with regards to show notes and benjaminbrain.co.uk/Kul-Mahay already being there. But if people do want to find out more about you and the services that you offer online, whereabouts can we find you? Which are some of the social media platforms that you're on?
You can find me all over Facebook. Just look for Kul Mahay on Facebook. That's Kulmahay. You find me on LinkedIn, surprisingly under the same name, and the same on Instagram and on Twitter. And my website is also www.kulmahay.com.
Wow, well, thank you, Kul. It's been a really amazing experience for me. I've taken on so much on board myself that I know is going to make a positive difference to my life looking forward. And like I say, this day that I've got booked off on Thursday to really get down to some nitty-gritty planning, I'm really looking forward to now. So I just want to thank you so much for sharing your time.
You're so welcome, and thanks for the opportunity. I've really enjoyed it. It's nice to just sit and reflect just by talking it through with somebody else anyway.
Yeah, we rarely get time to actually sit back and do that, don't we? So
Absolutely.
To actually reflect on some of the successes and the path that we've been on. So I'd like to wish you and the business and all of your experiences and the coaching and the Ignite Your Inner Potential. I know we'll be seeing a lot more of that, but all the best for the future. To all of the listeners, thank you for tuning in. Really appreciate your support, and look forward to catching up with all of you on next week's episode of The Truth About Business. One final thing before you go. If you enjoyed this interview and want to make sure you don't miss out on the next episode with another real-life business champion, make sure you subscribe via iTunes, Spotify, your favourite podcast app, or by visiting my blog at benjaminbrain.co.uk and hitting subscribe. At the blog, you'll also find the show notes to this episode, which includes all the relevant links to the website, social media channels, contact details, and anything else that was discussed in the episode. Just type in the name of the guest, and that will bring that right up for you. And finally, I'm always on the search for great business owners who would be happy to spare just a couple of hours of the time to share their business experience with our audience. So if you know of anyone that would make a great guest, or you'd like to feature yourself, just let me know. Send an email to hello@benjaminbrain.co.uk and I'll reply personally as soon as possible. Also, if you've got any feedback, questions that you'd like me to ask our guests, or any other suggestions, I am definitely all ears. That email address again is hello@benjaminbrain.co.uk. So that's it for this episode. I just want to thank you sincerely for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Stay hungry, stay fearless, get out there and make it happen.